Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the bonus episode, interview with author and healer James Kawainui. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are struggling in relationship, how to communicate effectively, build trust, and deepen intimacy so that they can be the best version of themselves in relationship and live the life they love. And in this bonus episode, you'll hear an interview that I recorded recently with James Kawainui. He is an amazing healer and now author of a compilation book of stories called Transcendent Men, Real Stories. And it's all a part of the book series entitled Find Your Voice, Save Your Life, Volume 4. Now, James tells his story of how he overcame an abusive childhood, the effects that experience had on him, and how he transcended into the man he is today. It's a truly inspiring story of strength and courage that we can all learn from. It's the Men on the Path to Love podcast. James, first of all, welcome. Welcome to Men on the Path to Love.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm grateful and honored to be a part of your process and to be able to share with everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Tell us about this project. This is fascinating. And of course, I'm on this love mission to help men build a relationship within themselves so that they can be the best version of themselves in relationship. Tell me how you got started with all this.
I've been told for years that I was supposed to write my own story. And there have been start and stop places along the way where I attempted to do that and had not been successful. Just before we got on air, we talked about the fact that we had moved out of Phoenix 3 years ago and moved up here to just outside of Sedona. Mm-hmm. We live in a little town called Cornville.
I love that.
And when we first started driving up here, I thought, oh my God, I never lived there. And so here I am now. So never say never.
Right.
And after we moved up here in May of 2020. So it was right in the middle of COVID. I took 6 months off of work to get the house ready after we had bought it. And then when we moved in, and I realized that if I was going to write, that I needed prompting and I needed a community, and I wanted to also learn because I didn't have a voice and I didn't know what my voice sounded like, my style. Mm-hmm. And so I basically made a declaration to the universe, and I said, okay, I want to write. I know this is important, and I know you guys have been waiting for me to do this. And how do we get this done? And it was an interesting thing because about 2 days later, a friend of mine that I had met maybe 4 or 5 years before, she sent me a Facebook message and she said, I did something and I think it's right up your alley. And so she had been part of the project with a woman, with the publisher that she had been in a relationship with, and had just got done finishing a couple projects. And she says, I'm going to hook you up with her so that you guys can be introduced. And so the woman's name is Laura DeFranco. She lives in Bethesda, Maryland. She runs a company that's called Brave Healer Productions. And she had a calling that said, it's time to write books because people are looking for answers. And so I got on a project with her. She says, we're getting ready to write a book. I want you to be part of it. And I said, okay. And so the book was part of a series that she called The Ultimate Guide to Healing. She was on volume 4 when I found her. So I said, okay, I'll be part of that. And the reason I'm prefacing all of this is because over the next 2 years, I was actually in 7 of her projects. So I was in 7, what they call them, compilation books, where there's a lead author and they bring together a bunch of people to write their own stories inside of it. And so through that process, I met lots of beautiful people, and it got me through COVID because now all of a sudden my network was in some ways nationwide, but also worldwide because I was meeting all these people. And so there was one point that I'd met a man, his name is Scott Holmes, and we were both co-authors in one of Laura's collaborations. And then at some point, I think it was towards the end of 2021, Scott reached out to me, but Laura reached out to me as well. And she says, we're going to write a book just for men. And I've been telling her that I wanted to do that. I said, because in all those book collaborations, there would be 25 authors. And the first couple of them that I did, I was the only guy in all of the authors. And I'm looking at this going, this is somehow out of balance, and so through that I met one of the other co-authors in the book that I was in. Her name is Diana Leader. She's a woman that lives in Canada, and she started her own series, and the series is called Find Your Voice, Save Your Life. That was the way that she approached the people that she was working with, and she worked primarily with women. But Laura said, we're going to write a book just with male authors, just for men. And without even knowing what the book was, I said yes. Mm-hmm. And so I was the first author that signed on. And it took them about 6 more months to put everything in place. We didn't really start till the beginning of last year, 2022. And so in that process, we found 22 other men to be a part of this collaboration. And so the book that was born is called Find Your Voice, Save Your Life. The title of this volume is Transcendent Men, Real Stories.
Awesome.
So we were talking about that because that was a question that came up one day when we were talking, and we said, what is a transcendent man?
I was going to ask you. What does that mean to you guys? Yeah.
Yeah, and what it meant. And so when we got together, we kind of looked at that. And so for me, a transcendent man is somebody that is on the path, that has made a personal commitment to getting to know themselves better and to be able to create powerful relationships in their lives with men and with women or their spouses or their partners.
Right.
And so the coming together of the book was the preface of that. What does it mean to be a transcendent man? And the stories inside of that are all in relationship to those. And it's funny because out of the 22 authors that we have in the book, I brought in 5 of my friends.
So you tell a friend and he'll tell a friend.
What I did was I called all the beautiful men that I have in my life, and I said, I really think that you should be a part of this. And so we got together last year as a group and we started writing our stories.
I think it just goes to show, how starved men are, to share and also to receive.
What we wanted and what my goal of this was to let the men that are out there know that they're not alone.
Yes.
That was really what I wanted to know. And that we all have transformational stories. Mm-hmm. And we've all been through those painful places in our lives. And it's time to step beyond that so that we could really find sacred relationship, the sacred relationship that we're all looking for, not just men, but women too.
Yeah, everybody.
And everybody. And so the coming together of this book was really all about that.
Yeah, and I think about stories, and that was, one of the things I wanted to do with this podcast is to share my story and share my clients' stories, because stories are what connect us and make us feel like we're not alone. Like, oh, wow, I'm not the only one that's gone through that. And I think that's so important for men, especially.
We've been telling stories around the fireplace for thousands of years in all of its forms. And in all indigenous cultures, in most indigenous cultures, before there was written form, there were stories.
Sure, absolutely.
And so, and we learn through stories, we transform through stories, we share through stories. And the stories help us be connected to the person or the understanding or the idea of what the story is revealing. Mm-hmm. And it also becomes personal because it's something that we can relate to.
Absolutely. And before we get into your story, is there a story that really stands out in the book that resonates with you that you'd like to share?
Joseph Uvegas. The name of his story is called One Simple Voice. And One Simple Voice, Teachings from a Shattered Heart. And it was his story about his son committing suicide and the transformation that he had to go through, or he went through, and the pain that he watched, and the questions that he had to answer about if he did a good job and if he was a good father and where did he go wrong and everything else like that. And Joe's a very dear friend of mine now because of the book, and his story, one of the stories in the book that really resonated and spoke to me.
I'm sure any man that's been through that, any father that's been through that, would need that kind of support.
Any person that has been through suicide for somebody that's close to them.
Sure.
And especially if it's a family member, to have another view or another person's perspective of their journey
Mm-hmm.
and what they went through inside of that. So his story was the one that touched me, I think, more than any other ones.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, James, tell us your story. How did you become this transcendent man that you are right now?
Well, the name of the story is called Redefining Harold, the search for truth, identity, and redemption. And Harold was my stepfather. And I never really knew who my real father was. My mom had a relationship when she was in the army. And when she got pregnant, the man that she got pregnant with said that he didn't want to be in a relationship and he wasn't going to get married. So when I was born, he wasn't there. And we went back to Hawaii soon after I was born because she was stationed in California. And I was adopted by my grandmother. But the story is about when I met my stepfather, and I didn't meet him till I was about 4.5 years old. I'm the oldest of 8. I want to preface the story that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 7 siblings, 7 brothers and sisters. And from the time I went to live with my mom, and I didn't even know she was my mom until I went to live with her when I was 4 years old. From the time I went to live with her and my stepbrothers and sisters, and with Harold, my stepfather, I always had the feeling that he didn't like me.
Mm.
And so my childhood was filled with, it's at times pretty brutal psychological and psychological, emotional, and physical abuse.
Mm. I'm so
So
sorry.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time it was painful, and it was so painful that I did a bunch of things in my life, which is really what the story is about. The way that I describe it now is that he took every ounce or everything that was positive in my life, and he systematically attempted to erase all of it.
Mm.
And so I didn't have a very strong sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't wait, excuse my language, to get the fuck out of there. And so I literally left the week after I graduated high school, and I joined the Navy. And then I ended up moving from Hawaii eventually all the way to Florida. And the reason that I did that in hindsight was because I wanted to put as much distance as I could between me and him.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
And the only way that I knew how to do that, because I was talking about the distance energetically, but I didn't understand energy back then. So it was the geographical distance that I could put. And I was gone from Hawaii for 25 years. But because of how I was raised, I didn't have a clear sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I made huge compromises, and I made some really not so good decisions, let's just put it that way, about the kind of relationships that I was in.
Sure. Where was the role model,
I had no male role models. And I realized that somewhere in, I would say, my early or my mid-30s, that I was looking around and going, man, I have no positive male role models in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was being pretty much of a shut man. I did lots of drugs. I cheated on my ex-wife, or wanted to, let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that I was a very good father because of all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know who I really was, or didn't know how to tell the truth about who I was. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the process inside of the book, and one of the things that I said is, even though I had been out of his life for 20 or 30 years, he was still in my head.
Sure.
He was making all the choices that I was making in my life. And he taught me how to be self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
And to be very judgmental, and to always find fault in everything that I was doing.
That leads to those subconscious patterns of what you're saying. Yeah.
Very, very much so. And for a really long time, I didn't even realize that.
Of course, yeah.
And it's not part of the story, but I had an awakening 20-something years ago, where I was senior executive in a multi-million-dollar a year company. I thought I was doing all the right things. I was successful. I was making money. I had a position where I ran 3 departments, and I answered to the president of the company. Mm-hmm. We had when the Gulf Stream was available, we flew around in the Gulf Stream. I took clients to dinners, and this is back in the 90s, buying $1,000 dinners for our clients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't happy, and I had something happen, and I walked away from all of that.
Wow.
And I moved back to Hawaii. I went from doing that and living that life to living in a shack on the beach with no electricity, no running water. And the only way that I knew to do anything was to blow up my life. And so that's what I did. I blew up my life. And I lost everything, spent or gave away all the money that I had saved up in my life, and pretty much didn't have anything. And yet at the same time, there was this calling that was inside that was saying, you're supposed to do this. There was this really big push to want to help people. And now I understand it is because there was, I have a lineage that goes back over 20 generations in Hawaii and they were the healers and the mystics and basically it's being a shaman. Then something happened and one day I woke up and I said, shit, I'm going to New Zealand. A month later, somebody asked me to go to New Zealand. I went to New Zealand thinking I was going to be there for 3 months, and I ended up being there for 5.5 years.
Wow.
But I found my teacher there. And through the teacher that I found was my first true spiritual teacher, we started looking at Harold and all the things that I had done in my life and got to the point of really recognizing the level of rage that I had inside of me.
I'm sure
that I had been holding in, but when it came out, it would just annihilate whoever was in front of me. And so we slowly went through that. And as we did that, he helped me see the places and saw the pattern of that self-deprecation, the pattern of that self-criticism, and got to the point where I felt like I was ready to let it go, because you have to be ready to let go of that.
Yeah. You can't do it any sooner.
No, and so the process of that was me coming back to Hawaii. And at that point, I had some beautiful friends that carried Lakota medicine there. The Maori people have this style of body work that is so intense, but it will dig everything out of you.
Yeah. I've experienced that firsthand. Yeah,
that's right.
Very powerful. Yeah.
And so coming home to the point where I was able to face my stepfather and I was able to look at him and I was able to say, I forgive you. And the day that I did that, he actually burst into tears because he didn't know what to do. I know that there was guilt and shame, and I know that there was remorse inside of some of the things that he did. And by the time that happened, he was an old man and was not the person that I knew growing up. But it was that finally getting to that place of that letting go and saying, I refuse to carry you around with me anymore.
Yeah. Well, and, I always say to my clients, forgiveness is more for you than it is for the other person. Yet it's a win-win, because the other person gets forgiven and you get to set yourself free from the burden of holding on to anger, resentment, or whatever. Yeah.
And I write about that in the story because I realized that I've been carrying this anger around with me for over 30 years. But in the end, I realized that the only person that anger was affecting was me.
Yeah.
I was the only one.
He wasn't losing any sleep over it, right?
He definitely wasn't losing any sleep over it. And that's when I realized, well, wait a minute, who am I really angry at? Why do I want to continue to do this to myself? And so that was the beginning of the letting go.
Wow, that's a powerful story. What would you say to the men out here that may be experiencing this, or maybe have had some rough goings growing up? Based on your experience, what would you say to them?
There are 4 points that I created in the book, and because I wanted to be able to share something that men could take away. So there were 4 points in the book that I really brought out. And one is self-awareness is the key to change. We cannot change until we realize that there's something there and we make the choice to change. The second was, the way I wrote it is, words are spells, be careful how you use them. And so I started realizing the impact of the words that I was using against myself and the words that I was using to describe my world. And you
believe that, you believe what you're telling yourself. Yeah.
You believe what you're telling yourself, and also you also create through the words that you're using.
Right.
So if you think that you have a shit life, guess what, guys? You're going to create one. And so that had that I knew I wanted to change.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third point I wrote in here was change your outlook, change your life. And so the outlook, how I saw myself and how I saw my life had to change. And so it was the process of that, being honest and looking at that and realizing that you didn't do anything wrong, that you were doing the best that you could being a kid, not having any guidance.
Right.
How can you make choices without any guidance? And how can you know what to do when you're a kid and you don't have the capacity to make those kinds of decisions and choices for yourself anyway?
Yeah, and getting beat up, whether it's physically or emotionally, you start to just take that on as your way of being. This must be who I am because this is how I've been treated, so I'm going to turn on myself.
All the primary people in my life kept telling me that, so it must be true.
Right.
Yeah. And then the last piece inside in here, and this I think this is the most powerful of this, is asking for help is a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah.
And as men, we do not ask for help, and it's time we change that.
Yeah.
It's time we change that. And I know that I started to change, and I really started to change when the more I learned how to ask for help. There's things that we can't see about ourselves.
Yeah, and it can be terrifying for a lot of men to take that step. And it takes a lot of courage and strength to do it. And yet a lot of men don't see it that way.
We don't see it that way, but I came up with this understanding of that a few years ago, and I call it the gladiator mentality. And the gladiator mentality is we learned this so far back. I'm talking about to when we were hunter-gatherers and we were living in clans and small family units, right? Men really have two primary purposes. For me, this is how I see it: protect and provide. The DNA for protect and provide is so deep inside of us, right? Because if we didn't protect the women in our clan, in our family, in our community, then our species would fail to survive. And so we had to be able to defend and protect our families. And if you look at it from this point of view, here's a clan and here's another clan, and we're fighting for control or whatever it is. And it could be a clan, a family, a nation, however you want to look at it, right? When two warriors stand in combat to each other, when I'm standing in front of my opponent, the only thing I can think of is survive at all costs.
Right.
Find any weakness in my opponent that I can exploit. So guess what we did? We learned how to hide everything. We had to learn how to hide all our feelings, because if we showed fear, my opponent would beat me.
Vulnerability is not a thing you want in that case.
No, you don't. The thing about it is that as we learned that, as time went on and we learned that, what happened was we forgot how to turn it off.
Right.
So what we did is we shut off and we shut down. I used to laugh because I would watch women and we'd get together and they would talk about anything. They talk about everything. And women process out loud. Men process quietly by ourselves.
Yeah. And
women get together and they talk about everything. Guys get together and we talk about sports and weather.
Yeah, those are the safe topics right there.
and if you really want to, you would get into politics, but most of the time, it's a lot of times not.
Right.
And so we never learn how to talk about how we feel.
Yeah, so it's not our fault,
It's not our fault.
It goes way back, and we're just trying to bring it back in.
We are running a pattern and we're running a behavior that is older than we understand. And so what we're doing, what you're doing with your project and your vision is to change that story.
Yeah.
It's time to change that story.
And going through that change myself, is part of that drive to do this. Because, hey, if I can do this, any man can do this, that's the way I look at it, and reaping the benefits of it and seeing how life is far more rich and purposeful from this lens than what we're kind of used to, the way we've been programmed as men,
And all our primary relationships will change.
Absolutely. Starting with ourselves and then our partners, our spouses, and all beyond that in the world in general. Yeah.
In the world in general. And so this book was the beginning of that for us, for me, and to start this conversation and to really have the courage. And not talking about me, I'm talking about other men.
Right.
To have the courage to stop and say, I don't want to do it this way anymore. Mm-hmm. And as we learn how to do this, then we turn around, and which is natural for everyone, is let me show you how this is done, or can I help you see a different way or a different perspective?
Yeah.
That's the power, isn't it?
Yeah.
For me, it comes down to a communication breakdown. As we learn how to communicate differently, mm-hmm. then our relationships change.
Yeah. And when we can say, I feel, mm-hmm. and I need, well, there we go. That's the key, is to know what's going on within us.
Yeah.
So we can express ourselves and express what we need or want in the situation.
And feel safe doing it.
Yeah.
There's a key to that, because I'm not going to go in and I'm not going to be vulnerable if I don't feel safe.
Absolutely.
And I'm the same way as you. Most of my clients are women. Mm-hmm. And so I have a few male clients right now, and I celebrate them. And I tell them that when I see them for the first time, I said, I want to celebrate you because you and I are talking right now.
Yeah, me too. I absolutely. I'm right there with you. Yeah. Yeah, and I just praise them all the time for showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and creating that safety. I mean, whether you're man, woman, in any relationship, you want to create a safe environment to be vulnerable so you can have that authentic connection.
I want to know that my vulnerability is not going to be used against me. And I think that's a place that stops a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's men and women. It's not just men.
No, I know. Absolutely. And, we don't see a whole lot of that in our society, with the media and TV, social media, all the things you see, you don't get a whole lot of vulnerability. People are so guarded and protected from it. And yet, once they do, it's just, look how, DeMar, when he, collapsed on a football field, how the nation just became vulnerable all of a sudden, in that moment. And it's unfortunate that it takes something like that to happen, yet you see how we came together.
Which is a beautiful thing, because they were watching the men that were associated inside of the circle of that show their vulnerability.
And it was just pure humanity. And it was great to see, great to witness. Well, James, I certainly appreciate you taking the time. You said about courage, having the courage not only to take the journey that you did for yourself, but having the courage and strength to put this in words into a book, and share it with the world.
In some ways, that was the redemption, right? It was the bringing of that and telling the story. The people that I was most afraid of telling the story was my siblings. I didn't know what they were going to do.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, they didn't disagree with what I said, and so that was powerful. My sister says, I want a copy of your book, and I said, okay. So I sent it to her, and she read it, and she said that was good.
That's great. Nice to get that family support.
Yeah.
So tell us again the name of the book and the volume, because I know it's part of a series. So
it's part of the series. The series is called Find Your Voice, Save Your Life. This is volume 4, and it's called Transcendent Men, Real Stories. And you can find it on Amazon.
Great. Awesome.
So you can find it. It's Kindle and also hard copy. So however people want to reach out and to look at that. I offer it to women as well. I said, maybe this will give women a different perspective of where the men in their life are, and maybe the reasons why they think that they're unable to do the things that they're doing, but there may be deeper reasons.
Yeah, I think it gives them a better understanding of what men have been through and can overcome as well. James Kawainui, thank you so much for the time, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Anytime you're ready, I'll come back and we can chat more on this, if that makes sense, or on something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a lot to share to the men out there listening and the women out there listening. All right, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Blessings, brother.
Blessing to you as well. And that will do it for this bonus episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Once again, thanking author and healer James Kawainui. Thank you for the interview. If you want more information about James or have any challenges in your relationship you need help with, comments about the podcast, or just want to get on my email list, please email me at bill@pathways2livingwell.com. That's bill@pathways2livingwell.com. Oh, and remember, coming up this week, it's the next scheduled episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Question for you: what are you willing to do or not to do to make your relationship better? Well, it's called Doing the Work. Please join me for the Work episode. And until then, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.